Becoming better at the game often requires you to go back to the beginning and rethink your approach. And what better place to start than analyzing your settings and making sure you're squeezing every last drop of potential out of your gameplay. How's it going, guys? My name is Valued, and by the end of this video, you will have a firm grasp on the most valuable settings for any M&K player, and exactly how to fine-tune these settings specifically for you. But guys, this one's gonna be a banger, so without further ado, let's get right into it. Alright, so as we dive in, it's important that you make sure with any of the settings changed today that you give them time. All the settings we talk about today will feel a bit weird if they aren't what you're currently playing on, but that's only natural. Don't let today's video send you on a spiral of changing your settings nonstop because they don't feel good at first. Instead, use this video as a groundwork for your settings and then only change your settings after you have a bunch of games under your belt and you can point to a change that you absolutely need to make. It's easy to get discouraged when you're trying new things and playing worse at first because you're not used to the new setting. But guys, don't worry. If you're patient and mindful of your settings changes, you will see improvements and find a whole new version of yourself in Apex that you didn't even know existed. What better place to start than with mouse sensitivity? Your sensitivity is at the core of everything you do in Apex, from simple things like looting and navigating the map to complex maneuvers like wall bouncing or spray transferring effectively in a fight. With this in mind, it's important to take the proper time to analyze how you like to use your mouse and fit your sensitivity to you. So while it isn't necessarily a bad idea to copy settings from the pros, it's important to realize that most settings are not one size fits all. And this is especially true with your sensitivity. It's the most personalized aspect of your game. Many players use their mouse differently, having different ways of performing certain mechanics or aiming that heavily impact how they set up their game. The biggest example of this with mouse and keyboard is how you aim with your mouse. There's some players who aim with their whole arm, players that aim with just their wrists, and plenty of players that have a hybrid style. Knowing what type of aimer you are and how you actually use your mouse when you're finding the most success is the key to fine-tuning your settings for yourself. So if you're a wrist aimer, you're generally going to prefer a higher sensitivity, one that allows you to change targets or turn around with very little movement of your mouse. On the other hand, if you find yourself aiming with your whole arm, pivoting at your elbow rather than your wrist, you're going to want a lower sensitivity to allow for this extra movement of the mouse. There are benefits to all of these types of mouse use, but the key is to understand what type of mouse and keyboard player you are, how you are the most comfortable playing, and matching your settings to your strengths. Before we move on, you should really know where you fall on the spectrum to help you get the most of the settings that we're going to discuss. If you need to pause the video really quick to think about it, hey, don't be shy, I'll be right here. Because seriously, this can be one of the biggest factors in players truly finding their perfect settings. And hey, if you're struggling to figure out exactly what sense or settings would match you the best, the coaches over at ProGuides.com have got you covered. We have some of the best players in the world who have all dialed in their settings perfectly and can do the same for you. If you're struggling with your aim or you're just not performing as well as you'd like to, be sure to check it out in the description below. Alright guys, now before we hop into Apex specific settings, there are a couple of key settings outside of the game that you need to change on your PC. I know, I'll make it quick. But listen up, because these two settings have massive implications for the rest of your settings in the game. First, you need to know what DPI you play at and find one to stick with. Depending on what brand of mouse you use, most gaming mice will have software that you can download to fine-tune these DPI settings. If you're unsure which software you should be using, a quick Google search on your model of your mouse will solve the problem for you. Now, your DPI refers to how sensitive the actual laser of your mouse is, essentially raising your sensitivity as you climb the values, and the flip side for the flip side. Technically speaking, high DPI is a little bit more precise and will give you more control, but you want to be careful about going too high because it's possible to have too sensitive of a mouse. This is why most players find themselves playing on 400 or 800, and myself, I find myself on the 800 value. While there are some players that bump up to values like 1200, usually high values like this can lead to a really touchy mouse and hurt you more than they can help. Think of your DPI setting as the basis for everything else you change related to your sensitivity. Your DPI is essentially the guide that all your future mouse settings will follow, so don't go putting it too high and throwing everything off in your game. The other out-of-game setting you need to ensure you change is to disable Enhanced Pointer Precision in your mouse settings. To do this, simply navigate to your mouse settings in your Windows search and click on Additional Mouse Options. Here, you want to click on the Pointer Options tab and then make sure this box next to Enhanced Pointer Precision is unchecked. If you leave this box checked, the option basically gives you mouse acceleration and can interact really weirdly while playing FPS games specifically. While this can be nice for navigating browsers or other programs, it is definitely not optimal when playing Apex or any other FPS, so make sure if you got it checked, uncheck that box. Alright guys, so where I want to spend the most of this video is diving deep into the mouse and keyboard section of the settings. Now that we've ironed out all the prereqs that will impact these settings from the outside, it's time to get Apex settings themselves dialed in. The first big one, of course, is your actual mouse sensitivity. Most top players play between 1.5 and 3 mouse sense in-game. Now, it's important to remember that those DPI changes we talked about earlier will impact this sensitivity. So if you were 800 DPI and chose a 3 sense, you would basically be at the top of what the normal is for top level players. And on the flip side, and if you used 1.5 cents with a 400 DPI, you would be at the lower end of the spectrum. So it's important to not go too high or too low on both of these mouse indicators, but rather find a happy medium, using the actual in-game sense as the experimental value. If you're in the firing range trying to dial in a new sensitivity, don't change your DPI and your Apex sense. Rather, leave your DPI where you chose to have it earlier based on how you like to aim and adjust the in-game setting instead when dialing yourself in. Remember guys, these are not settings you should be changing lightly. So once you have settings that you're feeling comfortable on, stick with them for at least a few weeks and only change them if you can point to a clear reason to do so. And before you guys ask, just to let you know, my sensitivity is 1.6 on 800 DPI, so I'm on the lower end of the sensitivities. Another setting you must change to make sure your aim is as crisp as it can be is your ADS mouse sensitivity. You may not think this is a big deal, but if you're playing on a higher FOV, changing this setting can make your aim feel so much better. The thing is, like we discussed earlier, your sensitivity scales with your FOV. So when you go to ADS and your FOV decreases, your sense is also going to decrease. For some players, this isn't a big deal, but for many players, this sense difference is something that really throws off their aim without even realizing it. And with how often you go in and out of ADSing in Apex, having a large change in your sensitivity between these two different modes can be really odd to play with. So if you have your FOV at something like 108, setting your ADS sensitivity to 1.2 will give you a perfect 1-to-1, keeping the setting the same regardless of being ADS'd or not. But you don't just have to copy our FOV setting, you can always mix it up if you want to have a smaller FOV for any reason. Personally, I've played on 110 and I've played on 90. They both have benefits. The key is to increase your ADS sense by the same percentage you increase your FOV from the base of 90. If you do this, you'll always maintain that even sensitivity across the board. And to wrap up the mouse section, guys, make sure you have mouse acceleration turned off in-game as well. Okay, guys, so before we move into some keybinds, I want to hop into the Apex Legends settings. We won't spend long on it, but we have to touch on a few display settings first because it has some serious implications for your other settings. So I'm going to throw up the optimal settings for you guys on screen now, but I want to touch on a few of the specifics as well. If you want to copy them first, feel free to pause the video here and then hit play when you're ready. I'll be here when you're done. Okay, so generally you want to keep these settings as low as possible because it will remove a ton of visual clutter and make seeing and tracking enemies much easier. That being said, there are a couple key settings here that can have huge implications for your gameplay. FOV is a big one, as changing your field of view will impact your sensitivity. Finding an FOV you're comfortable with and sticking with it is key to dialing in your aim as much as anything else. And my personal recommendation is putting it to 108 and calling it a day. Having the extra FOV is great for taking in extra info in-game, and 108 is a nice value that scales well with the other settings that we talked about before. Okay, so moving past FOV, make sure you also have VSync disabled because this can cause some serious input lag, and make sure you have NVIDIA Reflex enabled if you have an NVIDIA graphics card. These two settings can do wonders for your game's responsiveness to your inputs and can shave valuable milliseconds off your mouse inputs. I don't want to spend too much time in the graphics settings for this video. Just know your goal here is to maximize your frames and visibility. While a lot of these settings will make the game look better, these extra graphic enhancements lower your frames and can make a lot of things harder to see. No matter how much of a beast your PC is, Apex tends to have a struggle running at high frames. And having these settings cranked down can do big things for how smooth your game feels and how visible some aspects of the game truly are. Alright guys, so now that we got our sensitivity and display settings dialed in, let's talk about some keybinds that can be super useful when trying to perform some of the more advanced mechanics in the game. The two biggest keybinds are mapping scroll wheel up or down to move forward and mapping the remaining scroll wheel to jump. Jumping with scroll wheel will make maneuvers like B-hopping much easier, as you don't have to perfectly time your jumps with your spacebar. And setting forward movement to the scroll wheel makes tap strafing possible. Well, at least for now, until Respawn sadly removes it. But anyway guys, currently these are probably the two most important keybind changes that you can make in the game. So don't leave a bunch of potential on the table by not adopting these settings as your own. Okay guys, so one thing I want you to do is stop thinking that you need to get used to the settings and instead fine-tune them to your specific preferences and strengths. We all have nuances and ways of using our gaming equipment differently, and if you use today's discussion as a guide to crafting your perfect settings, you'll be a top-level M&K player in no time. Alright guys, so let us know in the comments below what you're trying to work on the most in your mouse and keyboard game. This is a topic that I'm super passionate about, and I would love to make another video to help all of my M&K friends out. And guys, if you're already an M&K pro, feel free to drop some tips for our friends in the comments below. Anyway guys, my name's been Valued. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.